and you're very welcome to Teagasc Hedgerow Week 2021. My name is Keena, Teagasc Countryside Management Specialist, and this is the third year of Hedgerow Week. Last year, we were forced to go virtual, and this resulted in an enormous bank of valuable material. We collected video clips and joint articles with experts on almost every aspect of hedges. So this year we decided to build on the information that we have and use it in panel discussions to get the message out even further, to understand hedges better, because that's the theme of our week this year. Now, yesterday we had a very interesting discussion on the state of Ireland's hedgerows. We heard from Stuart Green that we have 689,000 kilometres of hedges, that hedges account for 3% of 119 intensively managed farms surveyed by Julie Larkin in her PhD research, and only 1% was classed as high quality. The Monaghan Hedgerow Appraisal Survey, completed in 2021 on farms surveyed previously in 2010, found a removal rate of 0.9% of hedges per year, and found 12% of the hedges in favourable condition. Lillian O'Sullivan updated us on the Farm Carbon project, with results expected next year. Mark McDowell from the Hedge Laying Association of Ireland stressed the need for the application of standards in hedge laying and coppicing. The identification for hedges, for hedge rejuvenation in schemes should be chosen by people and carried out by people who understand hedges. And finally, Alan Moore from Hedgerows Ireland referred to our hedges as being the equivalent of the Amazonian rainforests and just as vulnerable to destruction in recent years. So overall, the conclusion from yesterday was that we're lucky to have the network of hedges with huge potential. But let's not all say, as Shirley Clarkin said, let's not all say that everything is rosy in the garden. We really need to work at this, and but together we're powerful. And the purpose of this week is to understand hedges better. And the topic for today is biodiversity. And we are fortunate to be joined by 3 panelists. We have Éanna Ní Lamhna, author, broadcaster, journalist. She can explain herself when we come to her. We have Ruth Wilson from the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, and we have Jesmond Harding from Butterfly Conservation Ireland. Good morning, all.
Good morning.
So we're having a kind of a discussion forum, and we're showing video clips of birds, bats, bees, all sorts of things, and we'll get comments from the experts. So we are starting, Yvonne, if you can get ready to press the button, with a video clip we prepared with Bat Conservation Ireland and Tina Ockley explaining how bats use hedges. We have 9 resident bat species in Ireland, and all use hedges. The network of hedges in the Irish countryside provide corridors for movement, as well as habitat for feeding and roosting bats. Tina Ockley, Bat Conservation Ireland, will tell us more.
Well, bats, because they are nocturnal mammals, and while they're not a blind mammal, they rely on echolocation, and in order to facilitate echolocation, bats use linear habitats such as hedgerows to be able to fly through the landscape. So a hedgerow is like our roadways. It is a commuting route for bats to allow them to fly through the landscape from their roosting site to their preferred foraging habitats. So if the hedgerow is a good dense hedgerow, lots of insects, they will forage as they're commuting. They only eat insects, and they eat a phenomenal amount of insects. The typical pipistrelle, such as the common pipistrelle or soprano pipistrelle, will feed on about 3,000 insects in one night. So bats will fly, are only flying at night time, and typically it's the common pipistrelle. So if you see something flitting up and down, doing these lovely circles about 3-4 meters along the actual height of the hedgerow, that's your pipistrelles. Bats are very small, so the pipistrelles are typically the size of my tongue. That's the body of it, but their wingspan can range from about 26 centimeters to 32 centimeters. So our biggest bat is the Lyser's bat, which would fit into the palm of my hand, but would have a wingspan of about a foot. They will only roost in good mature trees in the hedgerows, so that's why it's very important to retain some of our trees in our hedgerows, because you need nice tree holes or split limbs. So anything there's a little bit of damage on the actual trees provides a space. The bats will actually roost in that space. Bats are a very important mammal as they keep down our insect populations, but they're also a very good indicator on how good our habitats are. So when you have a good, healthy population of bats, it tends to indicate that our local habitats and our landscape is in good condition.
Now, Éanna, let's come to you. Do you like the bats? Are you scared of them?
Why would I be scared of something that's the size of my thumb? For goodness sake, get a grip, Catherine. People are told all the time, bats need a new HR specialist. They need somebody to promote their cases because they're top predators in our landscape. I mean, as she was saying there, they feed on insects. We have 9 different species of bats, and most of them will hunt up along the hedge. There's a water bat, and there's a few other ones that might have more specialized habitat. But most of them are the top predators, so they're feeding on insects, as she said, and the insects have to have vegetation to feed on. There has to be a whole food chain in place before we end up with insects. And then, of course, there has to be proper management, because if everywhere is sprayed, there won't be any insects. So if the bats are going up and down and catching insects, this is an indication that spraying levels are not as high as they would warrant. I mean, they're not killing off all the insects. There's enough insects there for the bats to feed on. And of course, the bats are the farmer's friend, because obviously a lot of these insects are moths, and moths at the caterpillar stage can do a lot of havoc. So the bats can't eat caterpillars, but they can certainly eat the adult moths, and this is what they're actually able to do when they're up and down the hedges. So your hedges are linear habitats. If there's a bit further, or if the corner planted up, or a little bit more than one line of trees, even better still. And then, of course, not only are they feeding there, but they'll be roosting there as well. And we saw a dead tree there in the hedgerow, showing that these are important as well, places for them to rest. So they have to go off, obviously, and hibernate somewhere else, and that will be a different place for them. But all summer long, your hedgerows are really, really important. And if your hedgerow is in good heart, has plenty of plants, plenty of insects, the bats are an indication of this, and they're the top of the food chain and really, really good for the environment. So this scary nonsense about Halloween and talking about bats going into your hair, it's nonsense. I mean, I've been on the radio for 25 years, and we used to have a great slot, and thousands of people listen to us. And I used to ask them, did a bat ever fly into anyone's hair? Please ring in. And nobody in all that time ever rang in and said, I am the person with the bat in my hair. Some people would say, oh, my father knew a woman once who lived in County Cork, and they knew a man whose mother had the bat in her hair, or some such George Van Lum stuff. So they're really good for the environment, and the hedgerows are a vital habitat for them, because they're a top species. There are other top predator species in hedgerows as well. We have species like the stoats, for example. They are another very important top predator, and hedgerows, particularly ones where there are a bit of dry stone walls or banks underneath, that's going to be a vital habitat for them for breeding in. And again, you know, they're controlled by the prey, so they're not going to wipe out all the birds. They're not going to be a vicious article killing everything in sight. They're part of a balanced ecosystem, and hedgerows are really important for stoats in particular, something that we don't really see enough of. And then, of course, you have badgers and you have foxes, because I don't know if you said so yesterday, but a lot of our hedges are actually built on top of ditches. There were drainage ditches dug, and then the soil thrown up gave you a bank, and the trees were planted on top of that for the hedge. So those banks are absolutely wonderful places for badger sets, for the badgers to be able to burrow in that kind of a little hill on the side of the field. And it's a vital part of the lifestyle of a badger to have a set in order to breed and have their reproduction in there. So from that point of view, from both the trees in the hedge, structure of the hedge, and the fact that there's a linear corridor of them all around the countryside, they're really punching above their weight. 3%, you said, of the country covered in hedgerows. They're really punching above their weight for their importance in biodiversity.
And I suppose some of the mammals you mentioned there, no more than the bats. I've often heard referred to bats as the swallows of the night. So the ones that are out at night, we're not as familiar with them, I suppose, as the ones you'd see during the day.
Well, that's true, in fact, because obviously the ones that are out at night have learned the hard way that is the best time to be out. So you have badgers, foxes, hedgehogs exactly as well too, and even smaller little creatures like field mice and pygmy shrews and and even the bank voles. I mean, bank voles by definition are in banks, and these are all part of the food chain. I mean, our barn owls or hood, what you call them, the long-eared owls. I mean, they depend on these smaller rodents for food. And again, all of these are the farmer's friends. What farmer wants rats and mice and moths all gobbling up his food? So it behoves him, from his own point of view, never mind saving the world at all, from his own farm, have lots of hedgerows where these free predators will keep down the pests and keep up his profits on his farm. So it's a no-brainer all around, actually, Catherine.
That's a lovely start to our discussion, and let's move on when Yvonne is ready to press the button to talk about the bees in the hedges and how bees use hedges. And in this video, we are talking with Stephanie Maher, who is now actually working with Teagasc. In Ireland, we have 77 solitary bee species, 21 bumblebee species, and the 1 honeybee species. 1/3 of our bee species are under threat of extinction. Now, hedges in the Irish countryside are extremely valuable for bees, providing food and nest sites. Stephanie Maher from Trinity College Dublin will tell us more about the bees in the hedges.
A lot of our solitary species become active very early in the year, March, April, this kind of time. And there are some solitary bee species that really rely on particular early flowering species. A good example of that in Ireland is a bee called Andrena clarkella, which is a solitary mining bee. And it really relies on willow species. Hedgerows can provide nest sites for lots of bees. So, for example, most of the bees in Ireland, they actually nest in the ground. And when a hedge occurs over a bank, these can offer really great opportunities for these bees to nest, particularly if the bank is south facing, gets lots of sun and is well draining. And of course, there's the added benefit of there being lots of nice food nearby occurring in the hedgerows for these bees. Other solitary bees don't nest in the ground, they actually nest in cavities. So these are the type of species that you might see in your bee hotel in your garden. And I'm surrounded by here is bramble, and some of our species of solitary bee, when these bramble stems die off, they're hollow, and those bees will actually nest in those stems. The great thing about hedgerows is that they can flower all the way through from February all the way to September, October, and right now we even have ivy flowering in hedgerows. The other thing that hedgerows can offer to bumblebees is somewhere to nest. So you'll often find bumblebee nests at the base of hedgerows in hollows. So some of our most common bumblebee species are the white-tailed bumblebee and the buff-tailed bumblebee, and you'll always see them covering hedgerows, especially where there's lots of bramble. Bees, when they're active, they're spending most of their time gathering food. And some research has shown us that honeybees can visit up to about 5,000 flowers in one day.
Now, that was Stephanie Maher, who was with Trinity College and is now working with Teagasc. And just a reminder before I go to Ruth, that for the audience to please put any questions or comments in the Q&A function. And I forgot to introduce Andy Boland earlier, but Andy is my colleague and he will be keeping an eye on the questions and will be chairing the discussion when we go through our presentations. So Ruth is involved in working with the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. So Ruth, tell us about the All Ireland Pollinator Plan and your take on how important hedges are for bees.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so just a lovely video there, and you can see it was a very blustery day, and Catherine and Stephanie were getting good shelter from that hedge. So there's a good benefit of hedgerows on a day like today. So the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, we're on our second plan at the minute. It was launched earlier this year, 21 to 2025. Really, the first plan built up such support and momentum that a new plan was needed. And it's an ambitious plan. We have 6 objectives and 186 actions. I've just brought a wee copy, a printed copy here. You can get this on the pollinators.ie website if you want a wee bit more information. But really, the first objective in the plan is farmland, and we realise how farmland is vital for pollinators. It's also good for farming as well and for food production. The movement of pollen from flower to flower ensures full-bodied fruit and yields of high quality produce such as oilseed rape, field bean, commercial orchards and soft fruit. So it's a win-win if we can. The thing we need in the landscape is more flowers, more flower-rich habitat, and that's where hedges come in. They are the top action that we can do for pollinators. So we're looking what sort of a hedge is good for pollinators. Really, it's as high and as wide as we can get, with as much species diversity as we can, and so they can provide, as Stephanie and Catherine have said there, it's food, shelter, and also hibernation sites, and also the importance of them as transport corridors, almost like, highways through the landscape. And pollinators are just one of the insects that benefit from that, moving along those corridors from habitat to habitat. And the solitary bees don't move far from their nest site to get the flower. So it's really, we just need as flower rich as possible. And that's where wonderful native species like our hawthorn, blackthorn, and the willow is very essential. As Stephanie said, they come out very early in the spring. So they come out hungry. The female bumblebee hibernates and just very hungry. And the willow and those early flowering plants are fantastic. Also wild cherry. Then later in the summer, crabapple, elder rowan and spindle are fantastic, as well as wild rose. And also later in the season, the bramble is amazing, and the ivy for late sources of pollen. So just fantastic resource. If you want to go need more information on hedgerows, there's a how-to guide as well, if you can see that on pollinators.ie, and it's hedgerows for pollinators. And there's also just a wee bit about we've said about the nesting and hibernation benefits. We've also got a wee how-to guide on helping creating wild pollinator nesting habitats. And I've just finally mentioned that we're involved in a wee Protecting Farmland Pollinators project, an EIP project, which is run by the National Biodiversity Data Centre. And just something that we've maybe was mentioned yesterday a wee bit, but that's just looking at a results-based project. So if a farmer wants to improve his hedgerow management, he will be, rewarded. So it actually, puts him in control, and he can see how much he can do or wants to do to really benefit, that will benefit pollinators as well. So that's an exciting project, which you can also get more information on our website, National Biodiversity Data Centre.
Thanks a million, Ruth. And we'll come back to you for comments and questions, and please keep questions and comments in the chat for Éanna and Ruth. And now we're going from bats to bees to butterflies. But before we talk to Jesmond in Butterfly Conservation Ireland, we are going to talk about we will ask Yvonne to show the video on plants in hedges, because I think it might tie into both the bees and the butterflies.
There are approximately 100 plant species associated with Irish hedges, including trees, shrubs, climbers and herbs. John Feehan will tell us more about our hedgerow flora.
When it comes to biodiversity, the most important single component in the value of a hedgerow is the permanent inhabitants of the hedge. We're talking here about the woody species, particularly the trees and shrubs. The most important practical plant, hawthorn or whitethorn, for making sure that hedges are stock-proof, that happens to be one of the most important individual woody species for the maintenance of biodiversity as well. Well, the first flowers you're going to see, well, even from now on, Catherine, but especially from January on, the first flower you're going to see is probably lesser celandine, the golden yellow flower that people often mistake for buttercups, though buttercups aren't in flower yet. So lesser celandine, that will be followed quickly as we're coming into March with primroses. You have greater stitchwort, white flowers, etc. But by April, the grassy vegetation is beginning to grow up. So only taller flowers are going to catch your attention, like hogweed, cow parsley, etc. But once you get into the early part of the summer, the vegetation in the ground there now is going to be so high that the flowers that catch your attention are going to be further up in the hedge, and they're going to tend to be clambering or climbing plants such as dog rose or bramble or honeysuckle. Ivy is the last of the hedgerow plants to flower, particularly important because at the time of the year when it does flower, you know, in September, October, even into November, it's almost the only thing that's producing nectar and pollen for the few insects that are still around at that time of the year.
Now, that was the wonderful John Feehan talking about the flora in our hedges. I see a couple of questions and comments there about delighted with the amount of information, but it's hard to take it all in. Now, this video, this webinar is being recorded and will be released by tonight. And also all those video clips that we're showing are on our website, so it's very easy to access them. They're all less than 2 minutes and are very useful for you know, a quick update, a quick overview. But then our discussion is good. So that's the plants in the hedges, and that leads me on nicely to Jesmond Harding. So Jesmond, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And
please maybe tell us about Butterfly Conservation Ireland, and then you have a little presentation on beautiful butterflies.
Butterfly Conservation Ireland was established in 2008. We're a completely voluntary organisation. We lobby for butterflies and moths and their habitats. We have a fabulous website which is full of resources for you if you want to use them. Excellent for children in schools, both primary and secondary. Good, plenty of material there for artwork, for nature, and so on. So lots of material there, freely available to use. We run a reserve in Lullybeg in County Kildare on Cutaway Bog, and we also manage an area in the Burren. We run a programme of events during the year, free to everybody, whether you're a member or not. So you're very welcome if you want to join us as well. You can check our website. Just put in Butterfly Conservation Ireland, you'll get us. Today I'm going to talk about the importance of hedges for butterflies and moths, and I'm going to show you a presentation.
Thanks, Jesmond. That's perfect.
Now, butterflies and moths are what Butterfly Conservation Ireland is concerned with, and their habitats, and hedgerows are vital for them. As was mentioned earlier, there are 689,000 kilometres of hedges in Ireland. So hedges are a major resource for butterfly and moth populations. Incidentally, I'm releasing a new book. There's my email address there. If you're interested in the book, it's just literally hot off the press. It was delivered yesterday. So beautifully illustrated. I hope you enjoy it if you get a copy, especially coming up to Christmas. Now, here is a hedgerow bordered by mainly willow, and you can see some bramble, and you can see a species-rich verge, and also down the centre of that lane. This is a hedge on Cutaway Bog in the Ballydermot area in West Kildare. Willow is remarkably good for butterflies and moths. There are 115 of our larger moth species breed on willow. That's 115. It is the single most important plant for moth species, and that just counts the larger moths. There are hundreds of what we call micro moths because they're much smaller, and a lot of those breed on willow too. This is a species-rich hedgerow on a farm in Lullymore. It's on Lullymore Farm. It is the most species-rich hedgerow I have ever seen. It has common buckthorn, alder buckthorn, blackthorn, spindle, gorse, oak. It has holly, ivy. It is it's a remarkable hedge. It's stunning, and in fact, it looks natural because all of those plants are found naturally in the area. It's a very, very unusually species-rich hedgerow. Now, this is your typical lane. It runs east-west. It's from Mulhussie in County Meath, and you can see it. It's in spring. You can see the cow parsley and the greater stitchwort, and it's lovely and sunny. And those sunny areas baked in sunshine are brilliant for butterfly and moth species and bats, as Éanna Ní Lamhna was saying earlier on. All insects are cold-blooded, so they need external heat for the environment, heat from the sun to warm themselves up. So those sunny spots are really brilliant for butterfly and moth species. And funnily enough, if you look at the very edge, if you look at the end of that picture, you'll see a bit of shade on that side of the hedge. There are some butterflies that will breed, they have more than one generation a year. In spring, when it's cooler, they lay their eggs on the sunny side of a hedge, but in summer, when it's warmer, they actually lay their eggs on the shaded side of the hedge, so the eggs don't desiccate and dry out, or the larvae don't dry out in the heat. So a shaded part of a hedge or a shaded side of a hedge is also very good. This is a beautiful piece of calcareous grassland with loads of lime in it. That's at the edge of growing, that's on a hedge bank. Hedge banks are great because they often leach nutrients over time. And when they leach nutrients, they become poorer in nitrogen, but that allows a load of different plants that can't tolerate high nitrogen levels to move in. And you can see the lady's bedstraw, the yellow frothy flower, beautiful scent, used to be used to fragrance ladies' beds. And also marjoram, which is common marjoram. It's a native herb, and it's oregano, use it in cookery. So fabulous opportunities if you have a hedge bank to really, really boost the biodiversity of your farm and get those scores up if you're an environmental scheme. Now, this is real wild west countryside, literally is in the west. This is Knocknrow in the Burren, and you can see scattered hedge. You can see the hedgerows, very bushy and very lightly managed, and patches of scrub, really, really evens for butterflies. It's incredible. It really packs a biodiversity punch. And you can see the amount of nectar in the area. It's fabulous, it really is. And you can see the large hedgerow trees here. And I'll talk about those. Well, I'll just mention them now. There have been studies done on the importance of hedgerow trees. And they found that they have a very, very high influence on biodiversity, much greater in proportion to the number of hedgerow trees there would be in the environment. So hedgerow trees allow trees to grow in your hedges. Increased hedgerow tree density was found to have a hugely beneficial effect on wildlife. In fact, it was actually found to lessen the impact of intensive agriculture. So that's very important. Now, there is a little caterpillar of a brown hairstreak, and that's feeding on blackthorn in spring. The egg overwinters on the plant, and it hatches and feeds in spring. You can see the delicate leaves. A lot of caterpillars feed on plants in spring when the leaves are really delicate. There's the adult butterfly, beautiful butterfly, quite scarce, only found in certain small pockets in the Burren and around Lough Corrib. So really important. It was found elsewhere in Ireland, but the way hedges are intensively managed with all the edges cut has meant that that species has been wiped out in most of Ireland. So there was a study in East Anglia where they counted the eggs on a hedge, and they cut the hedge and removed 100% of the eggs. So that's a hedgerow management issue. These are peacock caterpillars growing, feeding on nettles. They're actually growing along a hedge bank. And there's a peacock butterfly. Who doesn't like peacock butterfly? One of the world's most beautiful species. This is an egg cluster on alder buckthorn, which is a hedgerow species. And there's the adult moth, really lovely. That's a female. The male's even nicer, but I haven't got a photograph of a male. But if you Google him, you'll see him. This is a little green caterpillar of a brimstone butterfly on alder buckthorn, and there is the magnificent adult, lovely sulfur yellow. This is a holly blue butterfly, and she's appropriately perched on holly. They breed on holly, and the later generation of the year breeds on ivy. So those ivy flowers you saw earlier, in September and August, September, October, they lay their eggs on ivy, and the caterpillars feed on the little ivy berries. This is a hedge brown or gatekeeper butterfly, and it breeds on grasses that grow at the edge of the hedge. 65% of our butterfly species breed on hedgerows. There's an orange tip. Look at that. Beautiful spring butterfly on greater stitchworth on that hedge I showed you earlier. Red admiral perched on whitethorn. Green hairstreak on wild raspberry growing at the edge of a hedge in Dreehead in North Kildare. Small copper on gorse. Beautiful butterfly again. That's taken from a hedge near me. And this is a beautiful carpet moth. Feeds on bramble, wild raspberry, hazel. And this stunner here is the barred yellow. And it feeds on common dog rose, which you won't have to plant. It'll turn up in your hedge anyway, naturally spread there by birds. So I hope you've enjoyed that. And again, if you're interested in the book, it's the details will be mentioned earlier. So thank you very much for that. And we'll talk again later on in our discussion.
Thank you very much, Jesmond. Some beautiful pictures there, and I'm sure there'll be questions and comments in the chat there. Just two simple ones that I'm going to handle, Andy, at this point. There was just to confirm, the length of hedgerows in Ireland is 689,000 kilometres. That's according to Stuart Green's work from yesterday, and the links there from yesterday. Now it does include everything from our stock-proof hedge down to our broken down hedge, as we say, or our relic hedges, and hedge banks with any kind of woody vegetation on top of them. So it may not be a stock-proof hedge, but it still has superb value for biodiversity. When you think of it, those kind of areas probably have been untouched for 200, maybe 2,000 years. And so that's where you'll get the flora, you know, the mosses, the lichens, and the type of flora that's there. And just a second question there, Andy, people asking about the links, especially Ruth's information, but the three speakers today will forward me, or I have all the links to anything they're mentioning or talking about, and we shall, that'll all be on the website where we are, which comes from today. So Yvonne, if you are ready, before we come back to Éanna, we are going to talk about, we've covered nearly everything, and how could we leave out the birds? So probably the most iconic species. So how birds use hedges.
In Ireland, of 110 bird species that are regularly recorded in the Birdwatch Ireland Countryside Bird Survey, 55 use hedges. Of these, 35 nest in hedges. Hedges also provide food, shelter, perching posts, song posts, corridors of movement for birds. We're here today in the Birdwatch Ireland East Coast Nature Reserve, and I'm with Niall Hatch from Birdwatch Ireland, and he's going to give us more examples of how birds use hedges.
Ireland's hedgerows are absolutely vital source of food for so many different species of birds because they support so many different kinds of life. Ivy berries, essential for birds like blackcaps, they'll come and feed on those. Robins particularly love the elderberries. Then of course you have the insects that are attracted to the plants in the hedgerows. So a good example of those would be many species of butterflies would lay their eggs on the leaves. Those eggs hatch out and become caterpillars, which in turn are food for birds like blue tits. You also have then the birds that will feed on things like worms that shelter underneath the hedges. Blackbirds will eat the worms. With all those blue tits and wrens and robins, you have birds like sparrowhawks, which will use those hedgerows to come and grab a meal too, and that's all part of the cycle of life. Dunnock, which is a very common bird in Ireland, used to be known as the hedge sparrow, and for good reason, because it really does love hedges. They love the security of them. They like to nest perhaps in behind thorns and brambles where they feel secure from predators like foxes, hawks, cats that might bother them. Things like squirrels and rats too, they find it difficult to get in there. Another classic bird that would nest in a hedge would be the robin. Birds like missel thrushes, for example, they like to nest in quite tall trees, but they love to have a hedge below that where they can find food and shelter, and where they know that their chicks will be able to find berries come the autumn time after they fledge from the nest. Birds like finches as well, so chaffinch, goldfinch, greenfinch, they'll often nest in trees that go above hedgerows, particularly things like sometimes in willows, for example, in hazel, in alder. Male blackbirds singing from the top of a hedgerow, using it as a song perch. They want to be seen because they want to proclaim a territory. Sedge warblers, which would normally nest inside reed beds and in grassland, they will use the tops of hedgerows as song posts where they do song flights up from them to display and then duck back into cover before predator comes. And it shows why hedgerows are so important.
Apologies. Was it just me who dropped out, Andy?
Yeah, you're okay. You're back.
We're back. Niall Hatch stopped in midstream about the sparrowhawk for me. I'm not sure. Did you get to the end of the video?
We did, yeah.
I think we
Super.
did, yeah. Yeah, we did.
Super, super. We'll blame Storm Barra again. And sincere apologies for the late start this morning. We had technical difficulties as well. And as I was a bit flustered, I forgot to introduce Andy Boland, my colleague in the Environment Specialist, and also Yvonne Maher, who may not appear, but is the whole behind the scenes. Nothing, and she did work miracles this morning to get us going, but sincere apologies about the late start. Éanna, have you discussed the birds and hedges or added to Niall's piece?
It's great to hear Niall talking about the birds and hedgerows, because obviously that's a great, big, enormous component of it. Interesting that 55 species of birds use our hedgerows, because I think that's the most obvious thing everybody sees when they're near a hedge are the birds. I mean, talk about not seeing the wood for the trees, but you can never see the birds, but you can hear them. And of course, the hedgerow birds are the ones that used to be our native woodland species. And because our woodlands have gone really very low compared to what we had long ago, the birds didn't go extinct. They decided to slum it and go and live in a hedge instead, because hedges are really linear woodlands. So all of those species that he mentioned, the robin, the dunnock, the willow warblers, all of those ones are birds that communicate by sound because they were used to living in the woods. So they're a haven of places for birds to sing from the top of perches. And this is, of course, and then, of course, the other thing is so many of them nest in the different parts of the hedge. They nest maybe in the bank, they nest in the lower part, they nest in the prickly things, they nest up at the top, they nest all over the different levels in the hedge. So it's vital that the hedges are not cut during the nesting season. And the regulations are you can't cut your hedges from the 1st of March or until the 31st of August, because that is the whole time for the nesting season. And that's really, really important that should be maintained, because once a hedge is interrupted or cut back of anything, there's a disturbance, the branches are cut, it's all a terrible upset. And as like everything else, if they don't, like Jesmond was saying about the butterflies, the same with, and the eggs getting distracted by people cutting hedges. So the restrictions on cutting the hedges between March the 1st and 31st of August, while it is for birds, it's also for the other creatures that live in the hedge as well and that are breeding there. So our hedges then are for great biodiversity. We spoke about the mammals, we spoke about the birds, we spoke about the butterflies, we spoke about the bees for pollination. But I mean, all the other insects are there as well. And nobody mentioned the decomposer. Somebody mentioned the bottom of the hedge. I think it was Niall. But there's a whole rake of stuff there, because all the leaves fall down. I mean, there's a lot of these trees and the hedges are deciduous, and all those leaves are broken down by the decomposers, by the woodlice, by the creepy crawlies of all sorts that are down there, breaking down those leaves, millipedes, centipedes feeding on the millipedes. So you have a whole food chain down underneath the hedge, breaking all those things back down again and putting them back into the soil, breaking down our leaves. So it's a complete and utter ecosystem from start to finish, from the plants that actually fix the carbon from the atmosphere. Some of those hedgerow trees can be very old. In the Tree Council, where I'm the president, we have measured heritage trees, and some of the trees have huge amounts of carbon stored in their trunks. I mean, a fully grown tree that can have something like 5 cubic feet of carbon in it, which is like a huge amount of carbon dioxide taken out of the atmosphere. So their contribution to climate change is by taking in the carbon and holding on to it. So from a point of view of that, it's a whole habitat that runs the gamut from saving us from the worst of climate change, says she, looking out at it's not a hurricane, I know, but it practically is, God knows, all the way back down then to the plants that are growing there, the lovely flowers that we were looking at in spring, because it's like a woodland, and most of the flowers will actually come out in springtime before the leaves come on the trees on the sunny side of the hedge, whereas in the summertime you tend to have more things that can put up with shade, things like ferns and ivy and mosses and those kind of things that you would get in a woodland anyway. But because it's a linear hedge, you have the two sides of it, so it's more like a woodland edge, and there are flowers, fruits there all summer. Niall was pointing out the various berries and nuts. Hazel is a great one in the hedge, because you get all the hazelnuts there for the animals in the autumn time. Starting in August, in actual fact, you have your hazelnuts. So a proper hedge can provide all of the things that we require for for wildlife in the hedge, and it's only a matter of going easy on the cutting back, going easy on the trimming. I know there's various regulations about what you must do with your hedge, but you know, go easy on it. Don't be the example to the neighbourhood of how much you chopped up your hedge. Oh, by definition, be like those lovely burren hedges that escape. Let your elder trees grow, let your hawthorn, they'll grow into a tree if you let them grow enough. I know they'll be leggy, and Catherine will be giving out the legs that are gone all leggy. But I mean, you know, they're all tree species. I mean, we have whatever it is, 28 native species of trees. And to be a tree, you have to be able to have a stem and grow up to be 5 meters high. So hawthorn are considered to be a tree, as is blackthorn, as is elder, as is spindle, as is elder rose. Even though they might seem to us to be small, they are actually part of the second layer, that layer of medium-sized trees, and vital in a hedge for all the wildlife that we've been speaking about.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Éanna. So shall we, I mean, perhaps Andy's already taken over when I disappeared there, but shall I hand over to Andy to chair the discussion, and hopefully he's kept an eye. There's so many fantastic questions coming in there. So anyway, over to Andy Boland, and you're on mute, Andy.
Yeah, sorry, thanks, Catherine. I'm trying to keep an eye on questions and texts coming in here, and they're flying in at the minute. Catherine, is it okay? Just will we keep going until 10:40 because we started a bit late?
Absolutely.
Is that okay with everyone? Because I have there's a deluge, there's an avalanche here. Now I'll try and focus the questions to whoever I think, but I mean, feel free for any of you to come in. I mean, the first few, Éanna, is for really one particular question about you know, they have basically a monoculture, for want of a better term, of a whitethorn hedge. Is 12 years old. Is it worth at this stage to let a few of blackthorn, we'll say hedgerow plants grow up? You know, they really want to add a bit of diversity to the hedge at this stage. How could they best go about that?
Well, I mean, this is true. I mean, the diversity will occur. Hawthorn is a great plant for wildlife, and birds will come who have fed in other hedges and do their dropping. So things like elder, things like blackthorn that will grow from excretions from the birds are going to grow up in your hedge anyway. So I mean, let them come. I mean, you may have planted a monoculture of whitethorn, which is what, but other trees will come in, wind-blown seeds will arrive. So let it grow. Don't be taking out the ones that aren't matching. You know, the more variety you have, the better. So nearly by doing nothing, biodiversity will improve because of the agency of the birds, because the hawthorn is good and the birds will nest there, and they will have dined elsewhere, and they will have a call of nature from time to time. So, you know, you get seeds planted there willy-nilly that will grow. So leave it alone, essentially.
Yeah, sorry, is there anything specific to add blackthorn to the hedge that you could do?
Oh yeah, blackthorn would be great, because blackthorn have flowers before the leaves in springtime. Blackthorn, as Jesmond pointed out, is the food plant for the
brown hair streak.
Brown hair streak, yeah. And of course, it's a wonderful plant. Then it has sloes in the autumn time. It has lovely purple berries that we mightn't like them, but the birds do. And it's prickly as well too. So definitely let your blackthorn grow, and indeed any other. I mean, then you'll have climbers coming in as well that aren't necessarily trees. But you could also plant things like hazel and holly are particularly good, and you know, they'll grow slowly. The holly will, the hazel's good. So I mean, if you wanted to put in a few bits of willow will grow like the clappers as well. So like, you know, if you stick in a few, if there's any bit of a bare space or something, put in something that isn't hawthorn.
And I'm going to try and rattle through them fairly quick. Ruth, any annuals that you can add that would help the bees? Annual plants?
We would actually, it's if you can stick to our native species, you know, some of them will be annual, so they will be set in seed, but the base, it was lovely seeing the wildflowers at the base of the hedge there. They are also good. So if you can just move back into the field a wee bit further and leave a good base at the hedge, and let those wildflowers also develop at the base of the hedge. It was lovely there that we mentioned, you know, the early flowering celandine, and there's amazing plants like the little pea. It's like a little pea-like flower, the bush vetch. I mean, it can flower for so long, and it will set seed itself. So if we just move back out into the field a wee bit, the hedge will flourish, and the base of the hedge will flourish. So I suppose it's knocking back a wee bit on the fertilizer and the you know, anything that we add to that area, and let it just develop. So
yeah, That was
Yeah,
actually
one thing that people often do when they're mowing grass or mowing something, they throw it all into the hedge, you know, which is fine, it's not litter. But what it's doing is adding to the nitrate levels in the hedge. You want the hedge as poor as possible from a point of view of nitrogen, but the big bully, the grass and things won't grow, and the wildflowers get a look in edgeways. So don't be putting nutrients into your hedge in the form of plants you want to decay there. Put them somewhere else.
Another question, Jesmond, I don't know if this would be for you, but there's a question. We constantly give advice to farmers, but you know, there's a community group here asking a question. You know, we have a 3-kilometre hedge along the roadside planted 5 years ago, doing well. How could we increase the biodiversity potential of this, you know, monoculture hedge?
Well, I don't know I presume it's common hawthorn. Just to give a little some statistics, hawthorn supports 62 species of our larger moths, which is very good. So it's probably a hawthorn, and that doesn't count the benefits of the flowers. Like moths will feed at night on flowers as well, and some species will feed on developing berries. So, but if a hedgerow tree could be incorporated, like an oak supports 72 species of our larger moths and more in terms of the micro moths, the tinier ones. And on top of that, it also supports the purple hairstreak butterfly. And I have seen purple hair streaks on hedgerow oaks in Carlow. So those oak trees don't have to be part of a wood. They will also breed on hedgerow trees too. Even in exposed locations, they'll breed on those. I suppose a really, really easy thing to do is cut a little branch from a willow. Literally cut a branch and stick it into the hedge bank. Just stick it in. Don't have to plant it. Just push it into the ground. It will grow. Willow is unbelievable. It roots. You turn your back on the thing and it roots. And willow is really, really good. It flowers as well in spring, and brimstone butterflies, peacocks, comma butterflies, small tortoiseshells waking up from a long winter hibernation. They're parching for nectar and they head straight to the willow. So it's a great plant to put in. So I would put in some willow, get some grey willow. It grows all over the countryside, especially in damp spots, but it'll grow in drier places too. Push it into the hedge, literally cut it and put it in. You don't even have to be that fussy about how young the growth is. Even a branch, say 3 inches in diameter will take root. So that's a really, really easy way to do it. But I'd like to see more oak in the landscape. I really would. And also with the management of the hedge, if it's possible to leave at least a third uncut in any year, and if you have a hedge bank, and I really do recommend good field margins. If you have a hedge bank, let some of that be uncut in any given year as well. So the insects a lot of insects go to ground in the winter and they'll hibernate at the base of a hedge. So Éanna referred to earlier about molding leaves. Actually, there are some moth caterpillars that eat molding leaves, and there are also larvae that overwinter inside leaves in the curl of a dead leaf. So don't be tidying up too much. Zealous management of the countryside is not good for wildlife. Okay.
Another question that's come in, and maybe on a couple of occasions as well, is where somebody removes a hedge and then goes and replants somewhere else on the farm. So they're wondering, how long do the experts think that the replacement hedge will take to get back to the equivalent of the old native hedge? Now, I presume it depends on the type of hedge that you were removing, but I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
It depends. Well, as you say, I mean, look, there's little point planting a beech hedge. I mean, it does support a few species of insect, but beech, however attractive it isn't native, and it hasn't developed alongside most of the species that we get in Ireland. So there are 22 species of moth that breed on hedge in Ireland, on hedges and beech in Ireland. That sounds great. There's 115 on willow and 102 on birch. So relatively speaking, they are species poor hedges. So if you're going to take up a hedge, evaluate carefully why you're taking it up, and does it need to come up? If it does, and you're planting a new one, try and plant it on a hedge bank. You get so much more biodiversity value if you have a hedge bank with the hedge. There are plenty of studies done, and some very recent studies in the UK where extended field margins alongside a hedge were examined, and it massively bolstered the biodiversity count. In fact, it was actually counteracting the impact of intensive agriculture, they actually the study showed that it was actually mitigating the impact of really intensive arable farming. And they found there was no difference in the abundance level of moth species when there was a really good hedgerow and extended field margin there. So that would give you the opportunity to incorporate those features.
Okay, Éanna, have you something, Karen, to say?
No, I'm just going to say the question was how long would it take? And in actual fact, it doesn't take as long as you think. I've seen hedges planted on a bare strip, and 3 or 4 years, you know, it's up to your height to your head, even if they're only put in as quicks. So, you know, it'll grow quicker than you think, actually. So it's worth doing it. You don't have to wait 20 years. You're not growing a specimen tree. All of those quick growing things like the willow, indeed like hawthorn, like other things will grow quickly. So 3, 4 years, you're going to have something that's worth doing.
Have you anything, Ruth, you just wanted to say on that? No?
No, it is wonderful if you can keep the old hedgerow, and even the value in the soil below the hedge. I mean, that takes many years to develop. So there's good good information on hedge restoration, hedge rejuvenation, on how to, if you need it to be more stock proof, if it's been managed so that it is a bit poor, you could restore it and interplant, maybe to encourage more species richness, with all the things that we've mentioned there. And even the lovely honeysuckle and wild rose, those sorts of things in the hedgerow, the guelder rose, just extra flowers for our pollinators. It's just fantastic.
Andy, can I just come back to Éanna, because I get the question there. Like, I know the structure will be there in 3 or 4 years. I agree totally. But the old hedgerow that has the mosses and lichens, and what Ruth said, the soil, the biodiversity in the soil beneath it, I presume, Éanna, we're talking more like 100 years for that to get back, no more than an old woodland versus a newly planted woodland.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, the man has moved his hedge, presumably for some agricultural reasons. And the point I was making was it is worth planting anew, and you don't have to say, well, that's it, gone. I've destroyed 100 years, because they are. Like, I mean, our hedgerows go back to whatever, the 1700s, some of them, they've been there for a very long time. But just because you've taken one away.
No, I agree, but I just wondered what the view of
the you have the whole, as I was saying, you've got the lichens, the mosses, you've got the trees, the ancient trees. In fact, you've got dead trees as well, which are very important in hedgerows that have been and gone. I mean, there's elm that have been killed by Dutch elm disease. You often see the stumps of those still in hedges and re-sprouting occasionally. So, like, all of that the history will be in the hedge.
But I just wondered, like, is there any?
You really have to. But
I just wonder, is there a figure? Does anybody know? Like, is it 20 years? Is it 100 years? I say 100 years very casually. Like, does anybody have any? Will we ever get back to maybe?
Well, you can shortcut the process in enrichment if you plant a really species rich hedge. Like, as Ruth mentioned there, put some guelder rose in, put some spindle in. Put, in other words, less typical hedgerow plants, not your standard fare of whitethorn and blackthorn. Put your hazel in. Another nice thing to do is, if you can do it, scallop the edge of the hedge, so it's a wavy structure, because that creates microclimates for insects, and for bees, for butterflies, for moths, for all the insects, for amphibians as well. And you will sometimes see where hedgerow is somewhat neglected, where bits of it grow out. Those areas can be really, really great for nature, really fabulous.
I think in summary is what we're saying, is to retain the old hedge and plant a new hedge would be great.
we want everything.
We're being ambitious.
I'm going to have to move on through some of these questions. Sorry.
The number of trees, you could tell the age of the hedge, but that's for Britain, not for Ireland.
Catherine, one thing that I probably specifically direct this question to you, because it keeps coming up even at groups or among farmers. Is there a conflict in keeping hedges in trim, keeping them neat, trim and tidy, or leaving them natural and untouched? I mean, that question keeps coming up time and time again.
We'll be talking about hedge cutting tomorrow, with contractors and with the farmers, but in particular, and NPWS, but in particular, I suppose I see 2 types of hedges: escaped hedges, or untopped hedges or tree lines. That's one type, and then we have the topped hedges. and understanding that we have two different types. Even in the picture behind Andy, you can pick out some that are topped and some that are untopped, and they need different management. So I suppose, without going into too much detail, but my summary is that you do not top the escaped hedges, and you do not let the topped hedges escape. So we'll go into that in more detail tomorrow, but little and often. But the key is to have a mixture on your farm, that you don't, there's clearly wrong things to do. Okay, thanks, Andy.
Another question that we often get asked about the application or going too close to the hedge with spreading fertilizer or organic fertilizer. But what about lime? Does lime have any? I presume it can have an influence on the flora or fauna on the hedge if you get too close to the hedge spreading lime. Anyone? Any comment on that?
Well, you are. You're changing the thing again. Yeah, Ruth.
Yeah, no, it's better. Give a good wide berth, from your hedge, and just let it flourish, because it will really influence, and it's actually creating more of a management problem when you do put the fertilizer in, or the any chemicals or anything, because then you will get what we would call the dominant bully native weeds, and then that can be a problem for your crop or your field. So give it a good wild birth, and it's amazing how much native species diversity will come, which is just fantastic.
Lime is to make pH, and I mean, if you have an acidic soil and you want to put lime in it for your crop, that's one thing. But your hedgerow is in an area which has grown with the soil that was there. So if you lash in lime and it spreads into the hedge, you're raising the pH. That's not good for the plants that are there, and you've destroyed the amount of biodiversity in your hedge, because you've changed the ground rules. You've stopped it being so acidic, and where it had grown to be an acidic hedge over the years in that particular soil, you're now changing the pH. So that can't be good for a hedge.
Another, quickly, fuchsia. Is fuchsia beneficial for biodiversity? Has fuchsia any biodiversity?
Yeah, fuchsia is good. The fuchsia is not a native plant. Fuchsia is, and it's a red in colour. Bees tend not to see red, but because there's lovely purples and there's lovely loads of nectar in it, bees and moths, particularly moths with long tongues, can get right into it. So fuchsia is beneficial. It's a cork and kerry plant, and it's there, lots of flowers on it in the winter time. What do you think?
I presume it could take over a hedge very quickly, though, couldn't it? It could become very dominant in a hedge.
It can. I mean, I agree with Éanna that it provides a lot of nectar. I hate seeing it. I think I've seen them in Fennet and Kerry, and it just seems to wipe out everything else. It's like, I mean, it has the star quality of nectar, but it really isn't great as a food source apart from sugar. I don't like seeing it. I dread it. And I dread seeing the Montbretia growing at the edges of it, which also eliminates bush vetch, tufted vetch, bird's foot trefoil, everything else. They're a ecological disaster, those plants. They don't belong here. And I would really advise to get rid of them. Okay.
Loads of compliments coming in for the wonderful presentations. Again, they'll all be recorded. Heavy ivy on trees. Ivy infestation in hedges. That's a common theme that's been asked as well.
Again, ivy infestation. I mean, that's the word by definition means that it's a pest. Say an infestation. Don't be doing this. Ivy is a native plant. It's a woody plant. It's climbing up towards the light. It's putting out flowers, putting out berries, lovely flowers, as we said, in the autumn for the bees and the pollinators, and then lovely berries in springtime for various insects, also for birds. It increases the weight of the tree, and when you have huge storms like today, probably trees will be down. Lots of them will have ivy, because people will say, oh, the ivy killed the tree. The ivy doesn't. It increases the weight of the tree, and things that are too heavy, we're all told to lose weight. Things that are too heavy, if you have a tree with none, and the wind comes, okay, the heavy tree will fall. There's more windrow, particularly in the winter time. But look at all of the time that tree had the ivy on it. Look at if you did the audit, if you did the sums, how much biodiversity did that tree support compared to a bare and baldy one that had no ivy on it. If you're growing a specimen tree in the middle of your front lawn on your palatial acres, you might want a lovely tree, parkland tree with no ivy. If you have a hedge where native ivy occurs, get over it. It's not killing your tree at all. It's absolutely increasing the biodiversity. Do not use the word infestation in my presence.
We're coming. Sorry, Ruth.
I would just back that.
So would I.
Even our pollinators, you know, with it's a bit milder, the seasons are a bit longer. So, I mean, I was even seeing lovely queen bumblebees in mid-November feeding on the ivy before they go into hibernation. So it's just an amazing plant. And
yeah, it is.
If you get a chance to watch it in flower, you will just be amazed at the variety of insects feeding on it at that time of the year. So if you can leave a bit, you know, just as maybe you know, just not as being as tidy, you know.
I'm just sorry, Ruth, I'm just conscious Catherine wants a few minutes at the end, but you know, the questions that are coming in, I mean, there's been huge interest in the whole series, Catherine. There's compliments flying in, and I know you'll probably get a chance to look at all the questions, but I think we better call it a halt there, because you want 2 or 3 minutes at the end, Catherine, to maybe talk about what you're at tomorrow and the rest of the week.
Yeah, and perhaps if anybody has a final one pointer, please, from the 3 panelists. But just to mention, tomorrow we are talking about hedge cutting. So we have a number of contractors. We have Tony Mullins, a farmer who cuts his own hedges, Liam Herlihy, a dairy farmer who does hedge cutting for others as well. And we have 2 full-time hedge cutting contractors, Pádraig O'Brien from Care and the Cunninghams from Monaghan. And then we have Áine O'Connor from IFA, Dairy Policy Executive, and Dennis Brennan, ICMSA, a dairy farmer as well in Kilkenny, and Susan Callahan from the NPWS. So we have, I think tomorrow will be very much a kind of, how do we, you know, we know the state of the hedges, we know from today how valuable they are. Now, how do we get practice change? I suppose something I've been working at for a long time, and it hasn't happened, and we need it to happen. So a final comment maybe from just 20 seconds from Éanna, Jesmond and Ruth. And
hedgerows are marvelous places. They're a wonderful reserve. They're our native woodlands, and they are, in fact, in Ireland, our Amazonian rainforest. I reassure you.
Jesmond?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Try to make sure that if you're planting a hedge, get your plants from native seed sources. Don't be getting seed in from plants that come from Germany, from the Netherlands. Native provenance, your native Irish seed, you're guaranteeing then that it grew up with the ecosystem here. Don't be importing even native plants from abroad. Get them here and ask growers where the seed came from.
And our signpost webinar on Friday is focusing exactly on that topic, Jesmond, with Joe Gowran from Woodlands of Ireland and Maria Cullen from the Society of Plant Pathologists. Ruth, final comment, inspire us, please.
Yes, well, just going back to being ambitious, wider, taller, and definitely think about our native species. It's just wonderful, the variety we have, and that will allow flower richness in our hedgerows from early spring right through to late autumn, which is just what pollinators need.
Thanks a million. And Andy, thanks a million, because I think you had the hardest job there, trying to see, and apologies to those that we didn't get to come back to. I will look at the questions and we'll summarize in the morning. So again, apologies for the late start. We'll blame the storm, and I dropped out there a bit. Look, it's sincere thanks to Yvonne. It's the hardest job, again, being behind, making sure that things happen. Thanks to Andy, but obviously today the stars of the show were Jesmond, Éanna and Ruth. Really appreciate, because I think it's only that together, by working together, that we'll get somewhere that we all want to go. We may have slight differences of opinion, but we all want the same thing. So thank you very much, and see you tomorrow morning for anybody who's interested, and food from Hedges on Thursday morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Good.